Almost everything you've been taught about sex is a lie. They've stripped it of its true power, reduced it to either shameful sin or cheap entertainment. But sex was never meant to be just physical. Long before modern religions, before governments and corporations, before the systems that control us were even conceived, ancient spiritual traditions knew something far more profound. They understood that sexual energy is not simply an act of pleasure, but a key, a powerful force capable of unlocking the highest states of consciousness, a sacred technology buried under centuries of manipulation and suppression, because when you control a person's relationship with their own life force, you control their mind, their emotions, and ultimately their freedom. The most dangerous thing you can do in today's world is reclaim that power. And once you see how deep the manipulation goes, you can never unsee it. This is the full story of sex and spirituality that every spiritual seeker must finally understand. From the moment you were old enough to ask questions, the conditioning begins. Sex was a topic wrapped in silence, discomfort, or outright shame. Your parents, teachers, and community weren't malicious. They were simply repeating the same scripts fed to them. They too were victims of a system that has long understood the power of sexual energy, and even more importantly, the danger of you fully realizing it. Early on, you were taught that sex was something to fear, something dirty or sinful, an act that belonged behind closed doors, spoken of only in hushed tones. And yet, paradoxically, everywhere you looked, sex was being sold to you through television, advertising, and media, cheapened into a commodity, an object of consumption, stripped entirely of its sacred essence. You were trained to associate sex with desire, not with divinity, with lust, not with transcendence, with physical release, not with spiritual awakening. Religions were among the first to seize control of your sexual narrative. Ancient teachings that once honored sexual union as a pathway to the divine were rewritten to fit dogmas of guilt and repression. Entire doctrines were built around the idea that suppressing your sexual urges was a measure of morality, a sign of discipline, a requirement for purity. But what they never told you is that repression of sexual energy doesn't neutralize it. It distorts it. Suppressed desire doesn't disappear, it festers, it twists, it grows in unhealthy ways, and those distortions are exactly what the system feeds on. A sexually repressed population becomes easier to control, easier to manipulate, and easier to pacify. As you grew older, this conditioning only deepened. The media took over where religion left off, dangling hypersexualized imagery in front of you everywhere. Commercials, movies, music videos, all weaponizing sex to sell you something, to hijack your attention, to trap you in endless cycles of craving and consumption. But even as they paraded sexual imagery in front of you, the spiritual essence remained absent. You were being programmed to chase pleasure, but never fulfillment, to desire bodies, but never deep union, to feed cravings that could never fully satisfy, ensuring you remained a loyal, distracted consumer. What they never wanted you to discover is that sexual energy is not just about biology. It's your most potent spiritual fuel. It's life force itself. It's the raw, creative energy that flows through the universe, animates your being, and connects you to the divine. In ancient spiritual traditions, sexual energy was honored, cultivated, and transmuted into higher states of awareness. The act of sex wasn't seen as sinful. It was sacred, a portal through which human consciousness could transcend physical limitations and merge with higher realms. But you were never taught this. Instead, you were taught to fear your own power, and the deeper you were disconnected from your sexual spiritual energy, the more easily you could be controlled. A person cut off from their own source of vitality becomes docile, anxious, and dependent. They seek fulfillment outside of themselves, looking for answers in religion, in products, in entertainment, and substances, always chasing but never arriving, because the one thing that could truly reconnect them to their full power, the sacred understanding of sexual energy, had been buried beneath layers of shame and misinformation. What's most insidious is that this disconnection is so deeply embedded into culture that it feels normal. Entire generations grow up believing that sex is either something to be suppressed or something to be consumed, but never something to be revered. And so the cycle continues. The spiritual potential of sexual energy remains hidden in plain sight, dismissed as taboo or fantasy, while humanity stumbles in the dark, chasing fleeting pleasures and wondering why true fulfillment feels forever out of reach. But once you start to peel back these layers, once you begin to question why your relationship with sex has been shaped this way, you begin to see the cracks in the system. You start to realize that this was never about protecting your morality or preserving your purity. This was about control, because a person who understands and harnesses their own sexual energy becomes dangerously sovereign. They stop seeking validation from external sources. They stop chasing empty pleasures. They become whole. And that kind of individual doesn't fit neatly into a system designed to profit from your disconnection. The suppression of sacred sexuality is not accidental. It is deliberate. It is one of the most powerful control mechanisms ever designed. But it doesn't have to be permanent, because awareness is the first crack in the illusion, and once you see it, you cannot go back. Ancient cultures. Long before modern society twisted the meaning of sex into something either shameful or transactional, ancient cultures understood its true nature. They didn't view sexual energy as a dangerous temptation or a commodity to be sold. They saw it as sacred, as divine, as a living, breathing current that could awaken higher states of consciousness and connect the human soul to the very fabric of the cosmos. These were not wild fantasies or primitive myths. They were sophisticated spiritual systems grounded in thousands of years of experiential wisdom, passed down through mystery schools, secret societies, and oral traditions that dared to preserve the truth when the rest of the world descended into repression. In the tantric traditions of ancient India, sex was never just about pleasure, it was a practice of transcendence. The union of masculine and feminine energies wasn't simply physical. It mirrored the cosmic balance of Shiva and Shakti, the dance of stillness and movement, consciousness and creation. Through sacred sexual union, practitioners sought to dissolve the illusion of separation, allowing their individual selves to merge into the divine whole. Every breath, every movement, every gaze was an act of worship, a meditation, a bridge between the material and the spiritual. Sexual energy was seen as the coiled serpent waiting to rise, not as something to be feared or hidden, but as something to be mastered, honored, and elevated. The Taoists in ancient China held similar understandings. They studied sexual energy as a force of vitality, longevity, and enlightenment. The practices of Taoist sexual alchemy weren't created for indulgence, but for balance and spiritual growth. By circulating sexual energy through the body, practitioners aim to nourish their internal organs, balance yin and yang energies, and cultivate what they call Jing, the essence of life itself. For them, sexual union was not a means to exhaust energy, but to generate and refine it. The goal was not to lose energy through shallow release, but to transmute it into higher consciousness, better health, and even immortality. In Egypt, the mysteries of sacred sexuality were guarded within priesthoods and temples, encoded in hieroglyphs and rituals that outsiders could barely decipher. The union of Isis and Osiris was more than mythology. It represented the merging of polarities, the rebirth of consciousness, and the cyclical nature of divine creation. Sexual rites were performed not as acts of carnal indulgence, but as ceremonies to honor the regenerative powers of life and death, masculine and feminine, matter and spirit. These initiations allowed initiates to experience temporary dissolution of the self, glimpsing realities far beyond the limits of ordinary perception. Gnostic teachings whispered similar truths, portraying the physical world as a reflection of divine principles. For them, sexuality was not sinful, but a pathway back to unity with the divine source, a way to transcend the material illusion and reunite with ultimate truth. Even in some early Christian sects, before the church crushed their teachings, there were echoes of this sacred understanding of union. Long before celibacy became a weapon of moral control, these ancient traditions were not ignorant or naive. They recognized what modern society has chosen to forget: that sexual energy is life force itself, the same energy that creates life, sustains vitality, fuels creativity, and awakens higher states of awareness. They understood that to master this energy was to hold a key to personal sovereignty, profound intimacy, and spiritual transcendence. But as these teachings spread, they became dangerous to the rising systems of control because a population empowered by their own life force is not easily ruled. You cannot control people who no longer need external validation, who no longer fear their own desires, who no longer depend on authority to dictate what is moral and what is sinful. A spiritually awakened society cannot be manipulated through shame, guilt, or manufactured desires, and so these teachings were systematically buried. The temples were destroyed, the priesthoods dismantled, the mysteries scattered, their remnants only surviving in esoteric circles, coded texts, and whispered traditions. What remains today are fragments, tiny glimpses of what once was a profound and powerful body of knowledge. Tantra reduced to exoticized fantasies, Taoist sexual practices dismissed as superstition, the Gnostic texts labeled heretical, the Egyptian mysteries lost in translation. But despite centuries of suppression, the knowledge has not been lost entirely. It survives because truth cannot be completely extinguished. It waits in the shadows, ready to be rediscovered by those courageous enough to question the narrative and seek what lies beyond the surface. The tragedy is that most people today still live trapped within the programmed misunderstanding of their own sexual energy. They have been robbed of the wisdom that could have transformed their lives, their relationships, and their spiritual journeys. But once you begin to reconnect with these ancient truths, the illusion starts to crumble. You start to realize that you've been sitting on the most powerful key to your awakening all along. And the moment you dare to reclaim it, everything changes. If sexual energy holds such immense spiritual potential, then the question must be asked, who benefits from your disconnection? Why would such a profound source of empowerment be turned into a source of shame, fear, and endless distraction? The answer is as unsettling as it is simple: control. When you suppress or distort something as fundamental as your own life force, you don't just weaken an individual's confidence or vitality. You sever their connection to themselves. And when people are disconnected from themselves, they become far easier to manipulate, to pacify, and to exploit. Religions, long before corporations took over, were among the first to realize this. The more you shame people for their desires, the more they look to external authorities for guidance, for forgiveness, for redemption. When a person is taught that their own natural urges are sinful, they begin to distrust their own instincts, their own bodies, their own inner voice. And in that vacuum of self-distrust, the institution inserts itself as the gatekeeper of morality. The church, the priesthood, the doctrine all become necessary intermediaries between you and your own humanity. This is not spirituality, this is psychological warfare. But religion was only the first layer. As society evolved, new systems rose that found even more profitable ways to weaponize your sexual energy. The advertising industry discovered that nothing grabs attention and sells products like sex, but not sacred sex, not empowered sex. No, what sells is distorted sex, unrealistic, objectified, shallow images designed to trigger endless desire while offering no true fulfillment. They dangle idealized bodies in front of your eyes, telling you that if you just buy this product, wear these clothes, drive that car, then maybe you'll finally be worthy of desire. But of course, the bar keeps moving. The goal is never to satisfy you. It's to keep you craving because craving is profitable. Meanwhile, the entertainment industry feeds you stories that program your understanding of relationships, intimacy, and love itself. You're taught to chase fantasies that don't exist, to measure your worth by superficial standards, and to fear authentic vulnerability. The subtle message is always the same. Sex is about performance, about conquest, about validation from others. The sacred aspect, the deep union, the transcendence, the spiritual merging is entirely absent. And as you absorb these narratives, your expectations become warped. Real intimacy begins to feel foreign, even uncomfortable. You remain trapped, always seeking, never arriving. Pornography, perhaps more than any other modern invention, has become the most insidious weapon in this campaign. It offers an endless supply of empty stimulation, bypassing the need for real connection or emotional intimacy. It floods your brain with dopamine, rewiring your reward systems, creating patterns of addiction that are incredibly difficult to break. Each click, each view reinforces the cycle. Instant gratification followed by emptiness, followed by more craving. Over time, this constant bombardment desensitizes you, numbs you, and fragments your ability to experience true intimacy. You begin to see people as objects, not as sacred mirrors of the divine. But here's the key: none of this is accidental. The suppression and distortion of your sexual energy serves a very specific purpose because a population addicted to shallow pleasure is easy to control. They are distracted, they are emotionally unstable, they are constantly chasing but never empowered. They fear being alone, yet they struggle to form meaningful connections. They fill the void with consumerism, entertainment, and external validation, all while the systems that profit from their disconnection grow stronger and more entrenched. When you are disconnected from your sexual energy, you are not just disconnected from pleasure, you are disconnected from your own power, your own intuition, your own creativity. Sexual energy is not just about desire, it's about vitality, confidence, and life itself. When this energy flows freely, you feel alive, inspired, and in alignment with your higher self. But when it's suppressed or distorted, you become a hollow version of who you could be, easier to direct, easier to exploit, easier to silence. The suppression of sacred sexuality is one of the most effective tools of mass control ever designed. It operates silently, invisibly, and most people never even realize it's happening. They internalize the shame, accept the narratives, and live their entire lives never knowing what they've been robbed of. And that is exactly how the system wants it, because the moment you reclaim this power, you become unpredictable. You stop needing their products, their institutions, their distractions. You become centered, sovereign, and free. The truth is that your sexual energy was never the enemy. It was never something to be feared, hidden, or bought. It was always a gateway, a path to awakening, to union, to the divine. And now that you've started to see how it was stolen from you, the only question that remains is, will you continue to play by their rules, or will you reclaim what was always yours? Kundalini. Hidden deep within the core of your being lies a dormant power that most people will never activate, not because they can't, but because they've been programmed not to even know it exists. This power has been described in ancient traditions for thousands of years, yet remains mysteriously absent from modern teachings. It's called Kundalini, the coiled serpent energy resting at the base of your spine, waiting patiently for you to remember who you really are. The ancients understood that sexual energy and Kundalini are not separate forces, but one and the same. Your sexual energy is the fuel that awakens Kundalini, and when that energy is properly directed, it doesn't just heighten physical pleasure. It launches you into entirely new realms of consciousness. The Kundalini energy is not symbolic. It's not a metaphor. It's a living, breathing, energetic force within you. And when awakened, it begins its ascent through your chakras, your energy centers, unblocking, cleansing, and transforming your entire being. As it rises, it dissolves illusions, releases trauma, and burns away false identities that have been programmed into you since birth. The ultimate goal is union, not just with another person, but with the divine itself. This is what the mystics sought. This is what the mystery schools protected. This is why the system fears it so much. When Kundalini rises, you experience reality in ways that most people cannot comprehend. The boundaries between self and other begin to blur. The linear nature of time collapses. Feelings of deep unity, unconditional love, and pure bliss wash over you. You realize that you are not separate from the cosmos. You are the cosmos experiencing itself through human form. In these moments, the illusions of control, fear, and separation crumble. And once you've touched that truth, you are never the same again. But this is precisely why such teachings have been buried, because people who have experienced the full awakening of their Kundalini are not easily controlled. They see through the lies, they reject the manufactured fears, they don't need constant consumption to feel whole. They recognize their own sovereignty, and for the systems that thrive on your compliance, that kind of sovereignty is dangerous. The process of awakening Kundalini is not without risks, which is another reason it's been hidden. In a world where people have been disconnected from their bodies, their emotions, and their true nature, attempting to force an awakening without proper preparation can lead to psychological and energetic imbalances. This isn't a game. The practices that safely awaken Kundalini require discipline, grounding, and deep inner work. That's why the ancient schools of Tantra, Daoism, and esoteric mystery traditions emphasize training, mentorship, and gradual progression. The power is real, and with real power comes real responsibility. The tragedy is that rather than teaching people how to safely prepare for and navigate these awakenings, modern society chose to simply suppress the knowledge altogether. It was deemed too dangerous, too disruptive, too uncontrollable. Instead of empowering individuals, they chose to infantilize them. And so generations grew up terrified of their own bodies, disconnected from their own energy, and completely oblivious to the dormant force that has always lived within them. When you begin to reconnect with this energy, even in small ways, the transformation is undeniable. You start to feel more present, more alive, more attuned to the subtleties of your own emotions and desires. You begin to move through life with a confidence that isn't rooted in external validation, but in a deep, unshakable connection to your own source of power. Relationships become richer, creativity flows effortlessly, and life takes on a new dimension of meaning. You no longer feel like you're endlessly searching for something outside of yourself because you found it within. The system depends on your ignorance of this. As long as you remain disconnected from your own life force, you remain predictable. You stay addicted to the dopamine traps they've set for you. You keep buying, consuming, scrolling, numbing, and conforming. But the moment you awaken even a fraction of your Kundalini energy, the script begins to break. You stop playing their game, you start creating your own, and that's the ultimate secret they never wanted you to know. Your liberation was never going to come from outside of you. It was always inside, waiting for you to remember, waiting for you to rise. From the moment you were born, you've sacred union, been taught to see yourself as separate from others, from nature, from the divine. This illusion of separation is the foundation upon which modern control systems are built, because when you believe you are isolated, disconnected, and incomplete, you become easy to manipulate. You search for wholeness outside of yourself, in products, relationships, approval, and power, never realizing that the very essence of what you seek has always lived within you. Nowhere is this illusion more profoundly shattered than in the experience of sacred sexual union, where the boundaries between self and other begin to dissolve, and you momentarily glimpse a far deeper truth. At its highest expression, sexual union is not merely two bodies colliding, it is two energies merging. The masculine and feminine are not just gender roles, but universal polarities: Shiva and Shakti, yin and yang, active and receptive, consciousness and creation. In their merging, they mirror the original unity from which all existence was born. In that moment of deep connection, of full surrender, the illusion of separation collapses. You do not just touch another body, you touch the infinite through the vehicle of intimacy. The barriers between ego and soul thin, and for a brief instant, you experience the very fabric of cosmic unity. This is why sexual energy has always been central to ancient mystical traditions. They understood that in the act of sacred union, we reenact the very act of creation itself. The same universal dance that birthed galaxies plays out within our own bodies, within our own hearts. And in those moments, time seems to disappear. The past, present, and future blur. You are not just yourself. You are everything, everywhere, all at once. The orgasm becomes not just a physical release, but a spiritual portal, a glimpse into the eternal. Yet this is precisely the experience the system has worked so hard to strip from you, because a person who understands this depth of connection becomes harder to divide, harder to control, harder to keep trapped in endless cycles of shallow pleasure and consumption. They no longer seek validation through external conquests or fleeting approval. They no longer buy into the myth that happiness lies in accumulation. They see the sacred in themselves and in others, and when enough people awaken to this truth, the entire foundation of the system begins to shake. This is why the media bombards you with distorted images of what sex should be: casual, transactional, competitive. Why relationships are portrayed as constant power struggles, why vulnerability is framed as weakness. Because true intimacy threatens the very structure that profits from your disconnection. A population addicted to surface-level pleasure is easy to distract, but a population grounded in deep, sacred connection is dangerous. They cannot be divided by manufactured conflicts. They cannot be sold false versions of love. They see through the manipulation. The tragedy is that most people never even suspect what they've lost. They settle for hollow versions of connection, mistaking physical closeness for true union. They repeat the same patterns, chasing novelty while avoiding depth, fearing the vulnerability that real intimacy demands, but beneath the programming, the longing remains, a quiet ache for something more, a knowing that sex was meant to be something far greater than what they've been sold. When you step into sacred sexuality, you reclaim that which was stolen from you. You no longer chase pleasure for its own sake, but allow pleasure to become a gateway into transcendence. Every touch, every breath, every shared gaze becomes an act of devotion, not to the ego, but to the divine force that lives within both of you. This is not about performance, technique, or conquest. It is about presence, about fully inhabiting your body while simultaneously dissolving into something far beyond it. In these moments, you understand why the ancients called sexual union a sacrament, why they guarded these teachings so fiercely, because here, in this space beyond words, you taste a truth that no system of control can offer you. You experience your own divinity, not as a concept, but as a living reality, and once you have touched that space, you are no longer theirs to manipulate. The system's power has always depended on your disconnection from yourself, from others, and from the divine. Sacred sexuality destroys that disconnection. It returns you to unity. It makes you whole. It is a doorway to profound healing and the rediscovery of your essential radiant self. Desire. Desire, in its purest form, is a force of creation. It's the spark that drives life forward, that fuels innovation, that births new worlds both within and around us. But like any powerful energy, desire can be manipulated, twisted, and weaponized. The system has long known that if it could hijack your desires, it could control your decisions, your emotions, and ultimately your destiny. And there is no desire more potent, more deeply embedded in the human experience than sexual desire. What was once a sacred current of creative life force has been systematically inverted into one of the most effective control mechanisms ever designed. The distortion begins early, through subtle cues that condition you to associate desire with shame, guilt, and forbidden pleasure. You are taught to fear your own longings, to see them as dangerous, even sinful. This creates a perfect environment for control. You are pulled toward your desires by nature, yet pushed away from them by programming. The resulting tension leaves you vulnerable, always craving, never fully satisfied, constantly seeking external relief from an internal conflict you barely understand, and into that vulnerability steps the system, ready to sell you endless solutions that can never truly resolve the emptiness. The advertising industry mastered this game long ago. They realized that by tapping into your distorted sexual programming, they could create cravings that drive consumption. Sex sells. Not because it offers true fulfillment, but because it offers the illusion of fulfillment. Billboards, commercials, movies, and magazines bombard you with carefully curated images designed to trigger desire while ensuring that satisfaction remains always just out of reach. You are sold beauty products to make you more desirable, luxury items to signal your worth, and endless entertainment to distract you from the knowing sense that something is missing. But the void persists because consumption can never replace connection. And then there's pornography, a tool of mass conditioning more powerful than most people dare to admit. It offers instant gratification without vulnerability, pleasure without intimacy, endless novelty without depth. Each click delivers a surge of dopamine, reinforcing a neural pathway that becomes increasingly difficult to escape. Over time, your brain rewires itself to associate sexual fulfillment with screens, fantasies, and artificial stimulation rather than real human connection. The result is a growing inability to experience authentic intimacy. Real relationships begin to feel complicated, messy, even exhausting compared to the instant simplicity of digital gratification. This isn't accidental, this is design. By trapping you in cycles of unfulfilling pleasure, the system ensures that you remain distracted and dependent. A person addicted to surface-level stimulation is easier to pacify, less likely to question, and far more willing to conform. They stay busy chasing the next hit of pleasure, rarely stopping to consider the emptiness accumulating beneath the surface. And that emptiness becomes fertile ground for even more consumption, new products, new fantasies, new distractions, all feeding the same insatiable machine. The entertainment industry reinforces these patterns through its portrayal of relationships. Romance is reduced to shallow tropes of conquest, possession, and drama. Vulnerability is framed as weakness, and power dynamics are glorified as passion. The sacred dimension of sexuality is not just ignored, it's deliberately erased because if you never experience the profound depth of sacred union, you won't realize what you're missing. You'll settle for substitutes, endlessly chasing fantasies that were never designed to nourish your soul, but the consequences of this manipulation extend far beyond your personal relationships. A society trapped in distorted desire is a society that can be easily controlled. Divide people against themselves, against each other, and you prevent collective unity. You keep them isolated in their struggles, ashamed of their longings, and hungry for external validation. This isolation breeds fear, insecurity, and dependence on the very systems that perpetuate the cycle. And as long as the population remains divided, the system remains unchallenged. The most dangerous thing you can do in this world is reclaim your desire not as a craving to be indulged, but as a sacred force to be channeled. When you take back control of your sexual energy, you shatter the illusion. You break free from the endless loops of dopamine-driven consumption. You step into a state of wholeness that no external product or system can provide, and once you taste that sovereignty, you see clearly just how deeply you were being played. Desire was never the problem. The problem was always the system that twisted it into chains. But chains can be broken. And once you do, the life that opens before you is unlike anything the system could ever offer. It is a life filled with purpose, passion, and genuine connection. Awakening. The moment you recognize how deeply your sexual energy has been manipulated, something inside you shifts. The fog begins to lift, and you start to sense the vast reservoir of power that has been lying dormant within you all along. This is the beginning of awakening. It's not about rejecting desire or demonizing pleasure. It's about reclaiming them as sacred, as tools for growth, as gateways into deeper states of consciousness. Awakening is not a single event, but a process, one that requires courage, awareness, and a willingness to face the layers of programming that have shaped your entire perception of intimacy. Reclaiming your sexual energy starts with understanding that it belongs to you and no one else, not to the institutions that shamed you, not to the industries that sold you distorted fantasies, and certainly not to the cultural scripts that tried to define what your desires should look like. Your sexual energy is your life force, your creative essence, your connection to something far greater than yourself, and when you begin to consciously work with it, you open the door to levels of spiritual development that most people never even imagine. One of the most powerful aspects of sacred sexuality is transmutation, the process of redirecting sexual energy into higher expressions of creativity, intuition, and spiritual expansion. Ancient traditions knew this well. They taught practices that involved breathwork, meditation, and intentional focus to move sexual energy up through the body's energy centers, awakening dormant potentials and dissolving the layers of fear and shame that keep most people trapped. The goal was not to suppress desire, but to elevate it, to transform raw passion into a force that fuels every aspect of life. This is where sacred practices like Tantra and Taoist sexual alchemy become invaluable. These aren't cheap tricks or exotic curiosities. They're sophisticated systems designed to guide you into mastery over your own energy. Through mindful touch, controlled breath, eye-gazing, and conscious movement, partners can create a feedback loop of rising energy that transcends physical sensation and enters the realm of spiritual communion. It's no longer about release. It's about expansion, about touching the divine through the union of two souls, fully present with each other, fully awake. As you continue this journey, you'll notice changes not just in your intimate life, but in every area. You become more grounded, more creative, more present. Fear begins to lose its grip. The need for external validation weakens. You find yourself less reactive to the manipulations that once held you captive. The distractions that used to consume your attention begin to feel hollow, almost laughable, because you're no longer searching for wholeness out there. You found it inside. Reclaiming your sexual power also means facing and healing the wounds that the system inflicted upon you. The guilt, the shame, the self-judgment. They don't disappear overnight, but as you bring awareness to them, as you sit with them without fear, they begin to lose their power. You start to see that these emotions were never yours to begin with. They were implanted by those who profited from your disconnection. And once you release them, you reclaim not only your energy but your sovereignty. This is the revolution that terrifies the system the most. A population that has healed its sexual wounds, reconnected with its sacred energy, and stepped fully into spiritual autonomy because people who are whole are not easily controlled. They don't crave empty pleasures or chase hollow achievements. They build authentic relationships, pursue meaningful work, and radiate a presence that uplifts those around them. They become living proof that another way of being is not only possible, but deeply fulfilling. Awakening is not about perfection. It's not about becoming some idealized spiritual master untouched by desire. It's about embracing your full humanity, the raw, the vulnerable, the passionate, and bringing it into alignment with your highest truth. It's about transforming every experience, including sexual pleasure, into an act of conscious creation. When you approach sex as sacred, it stops being a transaction and becomes a ritual, a portal, a conversation with the divine. And as you walk this path, you'll realize that what the system offered you was never love, never intimacy, never freedom. It was control wrapped in the illusion of choice. But the moment you see through the illusion, you reclaim the one thing they cannot take from you, your own consciousness, your own capacity to awaken. Imagine collective awakening. For a moment, what would happen if not just a few individuals reclaimed their sexual spiritual energy, but millions did? What if entire communities, entire generations began to see through the illusion and reconnect with the sacred force that flows within them? The system that profits from your disconnection doesn't just fear individual awakening, it fears collective awakening, because once enough people step outside the program narrative, the entire structure begins to weaken. Control only works when most people stay asleep, but when awareness spreads, it spreads fast, and that is how revolutions are born. The suppression of sacred sexuality has always been one of the system's most effective tools for division. Keep people disconnected from their bodies, and you keep them disconnected from each other. Keep them shrouded in shame and guilt, and you prevent them from forming deep, authentic bonds. Keep them trapped in cycles of consumption, and you ensure their constant distraction. But once those chains are broken, everything changes, because empowered individuals don't seek to dominate or compete. They seek to collaborate, to unite, to build something greater than themselves. And that kind of collective power threatens every institution built on fear, scarcity, and control. And when people awaken to the sacred dimension of their sexual energy, they naturally begin to challenge every other area of programmed control. They question the media narratives that once kept them afraid. They see through the manufactured divisions of politics, race, class, and gender that have long been used to pit humanity against itself. They reject consumerism as the empty substitute it has always been, and most importantly, they begin to form new communities, authentic, supportive networks, grounded in shared values, mutual respect, and deep connection. These communities don't depend on centralized systems of power. They operate through mutual empowerment, through wisdom sharing, through real intimacy. In these spaces, relationships evolve beyond transactional dynamics. Love is no longer conditional. Sexuality becomes an act of devotion, not performance. Communication deepens, vulnerability is embraced, not weaponized, and from this foundation, creativity flourishes. Art, innovation, and healing emerge, not from competition, but from collaboration. The collective consciousness begins to rise, and with it, the ability to imagine entirely new ways of living, governing, and evolving as a species. This is not fantasy, this is potential. The reason it feels so radical is because you've been taught to believe it's impossible. The system has invested everything into convincing you that human nature is inherently selfish, greedy, and disconnected, but this is a lie. Human nature at its core is driven by connection, by love, by the innate desire to return to wholeness. The systems of control have simply built structures that exploit your disconnection for profit, but the moment enough people step out of those structures, the house of cards collapses. The collective revolution doesn't begin with marches or slogans. It begins quietly, internally, with each individual who dares to face their own conditioning and reclaim their sovereignty. It starts with a choice to see beyond the narratives you were fed since childhood, a choice to do the uncomfortable inner work of healing shame and breaking patterns, a choice to trust that what lies within you is far more powerful than anything external systems could ever offer. As more individuals make that choice, the ripple effect grows. One person's awakening inspires another's. Conversations that were once taboo become normalized. Sacred sexuality is no longer whispered in secret circles, but openly celebrated as a path to spiritual expansion. And with each new voice added to the chorus, the old systems lose their grip. They can no longer hold back a population that sees through their tricks, that no longer needs their manufactured approval or validation. This is how true revolution happens. Not through force, but through mass remembrance, through millions of people returning to what was always theirs, their bodies, their desires, their divinity. The system cannot survive a world where people are awake, connected, and aligned with their true essence. It depends on your confusion, your disconnection, your obedience. But once you reclaim your power, you become impossible to govern in the old ways. You become living proof that freedom is not something granted by external forces. It's something reclaimed from within. It is a flame that once ignited can illuminate the world. Conclusion: the truth has always been simple, even if they work tirelessly to complicate it. Your sexual energy is not your enemy. It was never meant to be feared, controlled, or sold back to you in broken, fragmented pieces. It is your life force, your creative essence, your direct connection to something far larger than yourself. And for too long, you've been conditioned to hand that power away to systems that thrive on your disconnection, to narratives designed to keep you small, to industries that profit from your emptiness. But now you see it, you feel it, and you can no longer unsee it. The moment you awaken to this truth, the grip of the system begins to weaken. You realize that freedom was never something to be given or taken. It was something that existed within you all along. The systems that tried to control you relied entirely on your belief in their power. Once you reclaim your own, their hold fades into irrelevance because a sovereign individual, someone deeply connected to their own sacred energy, is the one thing these structures cannot control. Reclaiming your sexual spiritual energy is not about reaching some perfect state of enlightenment where desire disappears. It's about integrating all parts of yourself, welcoming your humanity fully while elevating it into conscious expression. It's about learning to feel deeply, love openly, and connect authentically without falling into the traps of guilt, shame, or programmed scripts. It's about turning every intimate encounter with yourself or another into a sacred act of devotion, a living meditation on the unity of all things. As you step into this new way of being, you'll start to notice how easily you see through the noise that once blinded you. The hollow promises of consumerism no longer seduce you. The manufactured conflicts meant to divide you seem absurd. The need for constant validation begins to fade, replaced by a quiet, unshakable confidence rooted in your own alignment. You no longer chase empty pleasures to fill a void that was never truly empty. You reconnect with the source that was simply waiting to be remembered. This is how you become dangerous to the system, not because you're violent or rebellious in the way they want you to believe, but because you no longer need what they offer. You become whole, and a population of whole, sovereign, awake individuals is a population that will naturally birth new systems not based on control and fear, but on connection, truth, and authentic spiritual growth. The shift begins with you, but it doesn't end there. Your courage to awaken inspires others. Your authenticity invites them to question their own programming, and slowly, one conversation at a time, one healing at a time, one sacred union at a time, the collective consciousness rises. The revolution is not loud at first. It's subtle, personal, and unstoppable. You've been offered two choices throughout your life: to remain asleep and compliant, or to awaken and reclaim your power. Choose wisely, for the future of humanity may depend on it. So if there's one thing I hope you take away from all of this, it's that you are inherently powerful, divinely connected, and absolutely worthy of experiencing the fullness of your own life force. The conditioning runs deep, I know, but you're not alone. You have the capacity to reclaim your sacred sexuality, to rewrite your story, and to step into a life of profound joy, connection, and purpose. Now, I'd really love it to hear your thoughts. What resonated most with you? What challenges are you facing on your own journey of reclaiming your sexual energy? Leave a comment below. Let's start a conversation and support each other on this path. And if this video sparked something within you, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss future explorations of these hidden truths. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.